All right, so no PowerPoint, unfortunately, today. I did not get time to put that together. Um, I personally don't like PowerPoints. Most of you, some of you know that. I spent a lot of time in my career making PowerPoints, but now I don't have to do that. Other people make them, um, but I'm not a big fan of it. But I know in Sunday school it helps, but just didn't have the time to put this together. So hopefully you'll pay attention. I think hearing this may be helpful for us as well. Um, so the first four commandments are about loving God. The foundation of those commandments is the first commandment, right? You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, and soul. It's the foundation. And so the second part of the Ten Commandments is Jesus summarized it, and Deuteronomy summarizes this as well, is love your neighbor as yourself. So starting today and the rest of the next couple of weeks, as we wrap this up, this is the foundation of loving your neighbor, which makes sense because the transition from loving God to loving neighbor starts in the home, which means um, here's the idea. If you can love and honor your parents, you can love anyone. If you can forgive your parents, you can forgive anyone, right? That's the general truth of this, that it hinges on the home. So transition from God to neighbor starts at the home, and that makes a lot of sense. So it's the foundation on which the rest of the commandments that we will talk about goes is built on. Now, one thing that we need to watch out for this, because the enemy knows this, right? Which is why whenever you look at totalitarian regimes throughout history, one of the ways that they exert control over people, one of the chief mechanisms on how they control the people is they separate human attachment to family, which means they make people their primary allegiance of people to the state or to the government than to the family. And so the power of family, when the power of a family starts to go down and the power of government starts to go up, they're always inversely related. One goes up as the other goes down, right? So that's something that to watch out for, and I think we're seeing some of that even in our society as well. So that's the backdrop of why this is so critical as an inflection point as we go into the rest of the commandments. So so let's do this with asking some basic questions. So the question is, who do we honor? Who do we honor? The commandment says, this is actually in Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, right? Who do we honor? We honor our father and our mother. So it's both dad and mom. Now, the word honor is actually heavy. It's a heavy word, meaning in the sense that it is the word for glory, or heaviness is in that word, right? It's the idea of respect. It is submission. It is affection. It is appreciation. It is love. It has to begin internally, and it has to manifest externally. There's both to it. There's an internal recognition of all of these qualities, right? Respect, submission, love, appreciation, and affection it's not something that we show externally. It has to start internally, and obviously it has to be on the outside. Now remember, it's honor your father and mother. It's the same, right? They're put on level ground, right? So the way God designed it is God designed God over the family, and it's dad and mom and the children, which means you cannot play favorites, right? Children cannot play favorites to parents, and obviously parents don't play favorites to children. Um, there are times when there's a tendency for certain people to sometimes really mistreat their spouses and treat them as a child, right? Um, and that's very dangerous, right? Your wife is not your first child, right? It's your dad and mom, and then the children beneath them, underneath them. Now, why is this important? But it's also important because this is where human beings learn how to respect and live under authority and submission, because they get to then experience this in the rest of the world, right? Their neighbors outside. So this is the laboratory in which we get to do this, and that's why it's so important to start this at home. So who do we honor? We honor our dad and our mom, right? So not one or the other, not one over the other. It is both of them at the same time. So second question is, why do we need to honor our dad and mom, our father and mother? Well, Exodus 20:12 says, this is the only commandment with a promise, and even Jesus says that. In the New Testament, Paul says it again, right? When he talks to children in Ephesians 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, because it is the first commandment with a promise. It says it will go well with you, and you will live long, right? That your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Which means, I mean, the basic idea is that your life will go better, right? You honor your parents, and your life will go better, and that is true. It's good wisdom for 99.9%. I mean, Bible, there are exemptions for all of these things, right? But we don't live on those exemptions. We live on the truth that if we honor our dads and moms, our life will go better. So the question that we always have to ask, and this is true for this commandment, anytime you read the Bible, the question that we need to ask is not what is best for me, right? I mean, selfishness is so prevalent, right? That's the biggest sin in your human heart that you have to fight is me, right? It's this myself on the throne of my heart, and everybody's here to serve me. So the question is not what is best for me. The question is always what glorifies God, right? And the byproduct of what glorifies God will always be best for you. And that's the irony of it. But our thinking around these things is not what is best for me. What glorifies God the most. And that's what we do. That's why these commandments are so important, because they glorify God. When we honor our father and mother, God given authority over our lives, it reminds us that we can honor God, right? It says even in the New Testament, if one of the ways we know that you can be submissive to God is how you are submitted to other people. Jesus said that when a centurion came to him asking to heal his son or his servant. I mean, and God said, "You are a man under authority," so you know that, right? So he's asking Jesus, a man under authority always knows how to be under authority of God, right? So where children learn to go under authority and to submit and honor their parents is so important as their lives go better. It goes well with them, because here's the thing. Again, this is true 99.9% of the time. If you find, and this is not even true for Christians, right? These truths are true for anybody, right? All truth is God's truth, right? You can have a non-Christian honor this and they'll have good life. They will. That, if you're a generous person, you will attract a lot of good things in your life, because generosity is contagious, right? And you can be a Hindu and be generous, and you can do this. So you don't even have to be a Christian. So if you find an employee who is very hardworking, very diligent, very courteous, chances are 99.9% of the time he was raised in a good home, right? So it's going well for him, right? So these truths are important because, and this is the principle, this is the wisdom of God saying that if you honor your father and mother, your life will be better, right? Because it glorifies God. When I say something, when your train is going on those two tracks, it goes well, right? Your chances of derailment is significantly low. The next question I want to answer is this. Um, how do we honor dads and moms that we believe are dishonorable, right? For whatever reason. So this is the exemption to these rules. And these are realities. I know them. I know parents like that. I know children like that, right? So when I said honor, some people like already pull the emergency brake, right? Like you pump the brake on. It's like, I was hurt. My parents were very dishonorable. They were very hurtful. They never parented us well. All of that. But here's the thing. Here's some wisdom for all of us on this. Some of you may be just going too extreme, right? Because your parents were not perfect. Obviously, they were not. So you're like, that's not. I'm talking about real hurt, real maybe abuse, verbal, physical, emotional, whatever it was, right? But remember what they did to hurt you also hurt God, right? God was not absent in those moments. So understand that, right? God knows that. God understands it. It hurt him probably more than it hurt you. It hurts God even more, the things that we do wrong, more than we could ever understand. If we had a glimpse of God's heart when we sin, we would sin a lot less. But it does. He's hurt, right? The Bible talks about God's hurt when human beings go into disobedience and rebellion. So a few things for us to consider in those cases. Dishonorable dads and moms is this: give them grace, right? Know that they are fallen. But more importantly, give them forgiveness. Because here's the thing, forgiveness guards your heart from being bitter, right? Because if you don't forgive them, you will become like them. And this is so true, right? When God taught me about forgiveness many years ago, when I had to deal this specifically in my life, this was the truth that really got a hold of me, is that if I don't forgive people, I become like them. And the way I prevent myself from becoming like them is that I forgive them, right? I'm releasing them. Forgiveness is just releasing them out of your heart. That's all it is, right? You're not holding on to them. An author said it this way, unforgiveness is drinking a cup of poison and hoping that the other person dies. Right? That's how toxic unforgiveness is to our souls. It will never kill the other person, but it'll kill you. So give them forgiveness, meaning commit that thing to God. He is the perfect righteous judge, and he can handle it, right? You don't have to. You can release them out of your life. Give them honor for whatever honor is remaining, right? Remember, here's the thing. They always say salute the uniform. If you cannot salute the person, salute the uniform. What does that mean? That means that, if a police officer is a police officer because he wears a uniform, there's a uniform, there's a jersey that we all get to wear, right? That's the roles that we play, right? So there's a uniform of a dad and mom that they get to play. If you don't like the person inside the uniform, at least you can honor the uniform. At least you can honor the fact that they are your dad and your mom. So you can honor, if you cannot honor your father or your mother, you can honor fatherhood and motherhood in them, right? The uniform that they get to the role that they get to play. And finally, give thanks, right? Whatever things that God did through them, good or bad, give thanks to God for that. Bible says give thanks in everything, and give thanks for everything. Not because they're individually good, because holistically God then takes everything in our lives and connects them for our good. So all of the things in our lives are connected. In the end, it will all be good for us, although individually it will not be good to us. So that's a little side point. How do we honor parents that are dishonorable? And the fourth thing is, always remember that you and I have a Heavenly Father who is perfect, right? God has in the Bible, God's name is used as a father, right? That's how we call him, Father, our Father in heaven. But that doesn't mean that he is a male, right? So don't, because God is not a human. Um, God has both father and mother qualities, right? In the Old Testament, God talks about how he nurtured Israel like a mother. He protected her as a mother. He talks about labor pains, right? Pains of labor, birthing, right? All of those things are mothering qualities of God. And then there's fathering. So God is both a perfect father and a mother, although he's referred to as a father, but he has both those qualities in him. He has to, right? That's what he does to us. And in God's mercy, he has appointed, he has given us fathers and mothers outside of our physical family, right? In spiritual family, you have dads and moms. So if you do not have a physical father or mother, if you don't have a physical father or mother that you can be proud of and honor in the way that you should, there are spiritual fathers and mothers. Those are the people, at the end, you'll be in with heaven anyway. So in First Timothy, Paul talks about specifically older men and older women, right? Be examples to younger men and younger women. Those are important things because you are showing in the spiritual house what fatherhood and motherhood looks like. So that every one of us have an opportunity to be fathered and mothered, right? If your physical father didn't step up and physical mother didn't step up and do their job, you have spiritual fathers and mothers that can help you. And even if they are limited, you have a perfect heavenly Father who can help you, right? So you and I are never fatherless and motherless. Never, right? That's the incredible grace of God, that you are never at a point in your life where you're like, I don't have a dad that cares for me. I don't have a dad that I can honor, right? It's never a case. There are people you can honor today, right? If you find an older man, right, a dad, honor them. That's what you do. Honor them. It doesn't have to be a physical father. That's why we honor God. He's our perfect Father, right? So then the question is, how do we honor our father and our mother? So Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 18 and 19, 18, 19, 18 through 21, actually. Let me read this. It says this: if a man has a stubborn and a rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, remember both are important, and though they discipline him, he will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take a hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city at the gate of the place where he lives. And they shall say to the elders of the city, this is our son. He's stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. You shall purge the evil from your midst, and all the Israel shall hear and fear. Now, this verse should tremble all of us, right? If you're a teenager, you should sleep with one eye open if you lived in the Old Testament, right? Now, this never really happened all the time, right? Obviously, this is parents don't take their children. I mean, I've read this to my kids all the time, right? This is one. If you're a parent, you read this to your children. Again, you want them to sleep with one eye open. But here's the reality is that, no one took their child all the time and had them stoned, but it highlights the severity, right? These verses highlight how severe God looks at this, right? As imperfect as man will execute this, and not, but it's the idea that, you see, when God talks about sin in the New Testament, Jesus says things like this: if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It's not that we're all plucking our eyes out, right? There's not a lot of handicapped people in the church. I checked, right? It should be. We should be if we truly believe that, literally. But it tells you that how serious Jesus is when it comes to the sin of our eyes, sin of our hands, and like he's like, rather be amputated and go to heaven, right? So these verses tell you when God thinks about disobedience and rebellion and dishonoring our parents, Like he takes it so seriously. He tells you the severity of it, right? So with that in mind, how do we honor our father and mother? Because obviously none of us are not, we all rebelled and we all disobeyed. We're all alive, right? Um, if you are a child, if you are, yeah, if you're a child, a little child, you obey them. That's it. There's no negotiation, right? You obey not because you want to, you obey because you have to. You don't have a choice. You obey them, right? Because children do dumb things, right? They're foolish, right? They'll run into the middle of the street. They'll put their hands on electrical sockets, right? They do all kinds of things, and they have a rebellious heart. They're born with it. This is human nature, and so it's obedience. And then you get to adolescence, right? Teenagers, preteens to young adults. Um, what do you do with your parents at that time? You respect them. You respect them because you have more freedom than a child. Um, so you respect them not just in how you talk to your parents, but how you talk about your parents, right? So important. How you talk about your parents with your peers and with others has, respect them, right? Show that attitude of appreciation and affection to them in the way you respect them. You talk about them. Um, and when you are an adult, um, the dynamics change, right? Most of you are adults, you care for them, right? Then they become kind of the role reverses, right? When you were a baby, they took care of you, and then when you are an adult, as you get older, you kind of get baby-like attitudes and actions, and so you care for them, right? Paul says this in Thessalonians: if you cannot take care of your own family, it's not the church's job primarily, right? It's not the government's job. It's the family's job to take care of each other, including our parents. You care for them, right? We see this in Jesus on the cross, right? At the point of his death, what was one of the final sayings of Jesus on the cross, right? He was dying for the sin of mankind. He looked at his beloved disciple John and told him to take care of his mom, right? Chances are his dad probably have passed away by then. His mom was probably a widow, right? We know Jesus had at least 4 or 5 other siblings, but he had this incredible desire and need, and he cried that out from the cross to make sure that his mom was taken care of. So then the next thing I want to finish is this. Most of us are parents, right? Or we will be. How can we parent honorably, right? How can we be dads and moms that are honorable parents before our children? How can we parent them so that and do this well? Number one is understand this. This is such a truth. Children are not a burden; they are a blessing. That's what the Bible says. That is the truth of God's word. That's how God looks at our children. The society sometimes tells us that. We can sometimes feel like that. They are not a burden. They are a blessing, right? Which means you have to remind yourself that your children are your greatest blessing in your life, right? You and I have to believe that. It's not our jobs. It's not our bank accounts. It's not the home that we get to live in. None of that. Our greatest blessing in our life are walking around in our homes, right? Children are a blessing from God, right? That's a verse in the Bible. And if that is true, and we believe that, that is the greatest blessing in our life, right? It is our children, then we will act differently, right? We will treat them as a blessing from God. Because seeing them as a blessing will lead you to raise them as a blessing. Right? When your child disobeys, you look at them and you have to say, she's my blessing, right? She's intended to bless me. She is. I'm blessed because of her or him. And remember this, God the Father considers all of us as his blessing. Because when you do that, when you believe that you are a blessing to God, right? God calls you his blessing. God calls you his divine inheritance, like things that the language that God the Father uses for us. When we can see that, when we see that God the Father looks at us and he sees that it's God's greatest blessing is his children. It is. When we truly believe that, when the Holy Spirit has done its work to make that effective in our lives, not just believe it in our head, but actually feel it in our heart that I'm a blessing to God, then we will live a life of blessing to God, right? So when we see our children as a blessing and not a burden, not any single day, not because they are perfect, not because they perfectly obey us, none of that, because we see them as a blessing, just the truth that they are our children and children are a blessing from God, we will raise them to be a blessing. So children are a blessing. Second, children are our responsibility, right? The role of raising a child is not the job of the church or the Sunday school teacher or the school system. Like it's primarily, right, us. It's our parents, it's dad and moms coming together to raise your children. You find this in the book of Job. In Job chapter 1, Job makes sacrifices for his children, right? He goes to God, which means that, in New Testament word, he's doing intercession for his children, right? That's the New Testament equivalent of a sacrifice. Like he's interceding for them. So he's going to God with an offering, with the difficulty and the pain and taking the time out of his busy life and going before God and interceding for his children, right? So which means that we have this responsibility to ask God as they transition from child to adolescence, right? See, when they're little, they just have to obey because again, they're not too smart, right? You tell them they obey because they have to, but then you have to pray that God gives them a new heart so they obey because they want to, right? I was telling my children the other day that I don't just want your obedience. Getting your obedience is easy. Like I can be extremely mad at you and angry and all of those things and you'll obey. I know that. I'm not after your obedience. I'm after your joyful obedience. And that's a huge difference. I want you to joyfully obey me. I want you to joyfully obey God. I want you to read the Bible and say, wow, I want to do this. And the only way that can happen is if God gives them a new heart and God gives them inward joy towards the things of God. God makes them a worshiper, which means that they're looking at God, not running away from God, right? Those things do not happen by nature, right? It doesn't happen because they were not born that way. They were born with an extremely sinful, rebellious heart. They want to turn their back against everyone, right? They want to turn their hearts towards themselves. They want to be selfish. And the only way this can happen is if God gives them a new heart. They can joyfully obey him. And they can joyfully obey us. Which means that this is what we are interceding for. We're not interceding for God give them a new behavior or God make them. No, we're praying. We are battling for their hearts. God give them a new heart. That's it. Give them a new heart. Give them a heart that has this, explosion of joy towards you. And as they obey you more, they do it joyfully and they want to do it more. They, as imperfectly as they will ever do it, they have a heart that desires to do that for them. So children are a blessing from God. Children are our responsibility. And children are our followers, right? Our number one disciples is at home, right? They are our children. And that's why Joshua says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Wait, what does that mean? As Joshua just make a decree, right? It's like, we're going to do this. As a family, dads and moms have to set the tone. What is the priorities in our home? Like, what is it? What is the priority in our home? Like, where do we draw the line between, do we have enough activities for our children, or are they, or is it getting into the way of their spiritual growth? Like, what is important during the week for them, right? Uh, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's a declaration, right? Joshua was saying, I didn't take a vote on this, right? That's what Joshua will say. Like, this is not a democratic process. I didn't ask my children about whether they want to do this or not. It's just like, this is it. This is the declaration of our home. As for me and my house, we will serve God, right? And so they know the priorities in the home. They know what matters, what really matters to dad and mom, and not just what we say, right? Because you and I know this. The biggest impact in our lives was not the advice that our parents gave us, but the behavior that they exhibited. I don't remember, honestly, I even like last night as I was preparing this, I was like, do I remember things that my dad and mom told me? Like maybe a few things, maybe maybe a couple, but do I remember things that I saw? Oh my goodness, so much. Like observed, right? Most of parenting is not taught, it's actually caught. So kids have to watch us, and they are watching us. They will call out hypocrisy. I mean, my kids will call me out in an instant, and thank God for that grace. Like I get called out. Like I can be out on platforms like this and preaching. Like no one, like my kids know who I really am, right? They have to. I live with them. And so it's my responsibility, not just through my words. Yes, I declare that they have to know. Yes, as for me and my house, we have priorities in our home, but so much more in the way we live, in the way it can be seen visibly, seen in our home. And so they're following you, and especially no matter what age they are, and you and I can look back, right? You know that even when your parents didn't know that you were paying attention, you saw, you can look back and see all the things that they did. You can rarely remember things that they told you or the advice that they gave you. You can remember a handful of them, but you can remember tons of things that you saw in them. So which brings us as parents, right? We are driven to our knees on these things because parenting has to be done on our knees. There's no other way. I mean, this is the heart of parenting is the heart for someone's heart. It's fighting for the heart. It's a matter of the heart. And I can't do that. I can't do that with anything. I have to do this on my knees, right? I have to really ask God's help in this. Finally, let me close with this. We celebrate Christmas, and remember, we always say God became a man, right? And that's true, but it's not really true. God actually became a baby, right? Let that sink in. God became a man is an incredibly true theological statement, but the accurate statement is God actually didn't come in as a 30-year-old. He could have, but he came as a baby, which means he was raised by a dad and mom. Think about this. There's never been a time where a perfect person was raised by an imperfect parent, and it was Jesus. He was a baby. He grew up. Luke chapter 4 says, and the child grew and became strong. He grew. He learned, right? He learned. We studied this in spiritual gift series. Like Jesus turned off his divine nature, so he had to grow. He learned. He actually went to school and studied. And so there's a story we know at 12 years old, Jesus goes into the temple. And he is obviously now teaching the teachers, right? Because he's so smart. And then his parents come back, they miss him on the way, they come back and they tell him, Luke chapter 2, verse 50, it says this, and they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. Is that incredible? Jesus had a parent that never understood him. Never. Like even that story. But he was submissive. We don't honor our parents because they're perfect. They're not. Jesus had the most imperfect parent for a perfect person. But yet he submitted himself to them for 30 years. Right? Until he left the home and started his own ministry. And even then, towards the end of his life, he was taking care of his parents, his dad. He still submitted to them. Remember the verse I read, and I'm done, maybe in a minute. Remember the verse I read in Deuteronomy chapter 22, 21, where you take a rebellious child to the elders of the city and you stone him to death, right? Isn't it ironic that that's the exact thing that the prodigal son did? You know what the prodigal son's biggest sin was? Right? He was a glutton, he was a drunkard, he was all of these things in Deuteronomy 21. That's him. Rebelled against his father. And so the story of the prodigal son says this: the father ran to meet him. You know why he ran to meet him? Because if the son, which means that he ran to meet him at the entrance of the city. He didn't wait for his son to get to the home, because his father knew that the son had squandered everything. Like he was a glut. He was the perfect description of Deuteronomy 21:18, which means the elders of the city knew that the son had done that, which means that there could have been a chance where, as he got into the city, the elders could have taken a hold of him and could have killed him. And the dad knew that. So the dad outran the elders, probably to the gates of the city, and took a hold of this boy and said, this son was dead and now he's alive again. He was lost and he is now found. That is the love of God the Father towards us. And when he's asking us to honor our fathers and mothers, it's not because they're perfect. They'll always be imperfect. Even the most imperfect ones, we can show honor, we can show gratitude, we can show love, we can show thanks to them because of how much our Heavenly Father, right, took his wayward children like you and I, disobedient, on our way to hell, right? And he runs to us before we even run to him. He runs to us and embraces us. And as much as we understand that good news, that you and I this morning are embraced in the arms of a perfect Father, then we can show appreciation and gratitude and respect and honor to our parents, and we can do the same thing for our children.